I was growing up, every Sunday afternoon, we would take a trip to my grandparents' house. And the second we walked in the door, my beautiful grandmother's eyes would light up, and this gorgeous smile would spread across her face. And she looked at us, and I knew even then what the look meant was, how in the world am I so lucky to have the most perfect people to ever step foot on this earth be my grandchildren? To be loved like that is phenomenal. She would sit at the table with us, and she would hear every single detail of our week, and no matter how minuscule, she would always say something like, "Steffi, I can't get over how clever you are." In the winter, my grandparents would go to Florida, and my father would call them on Sundays to catch up. And he wasn't a very good storyteller, and we would sit in the room and listen to him talk to my grandparents. You could hear my grandmother on the phone trying to pull details of my sister's lives out. And you would hear her say things to him like, "George, you have to know how special those girls are," because he would really not be filling all the wonderful details that she wanted. In February, we would always take a week trip to visit them in Florida. Now, a side note, just to prove that I was raised in the 70s, we would go to Florida driving through the night. My parents had a pickup truck. We would put a mattress in the bed of the pickup truck with a cap on it, and my sister and I would get to sleep in the bed of the pickup truck all the way down 95. That's a side story. But we would get to Florida, and it was clear that my grandmother had spent her winter telling everybody about her amazing grandchildren. We would go to her tennis group, and they would know what instruments we played. And we would go to the coffee shop, and they would know what our pets' names were. And, it just went on during that week. We would end up, coming home after a lovely week. And one particular year, I think I was about 9, my sister was 11. My grandparents finally came home mid-April. We were so happy to see them. And even before we had a chance to get out there to see them on a Sunday, they had called my mother and said, "I need Steffi and Becky to help me." When they were in Florida, I saw how amazing they were at catching lizards. Well, but she was referring to those little green anoles that are all over the southeast United States. And apparently, one of these little lizards had decided to jump a ride and escape Florida for Pennsylvania for some reason. And so when she went to unpack her car, the lizard was in her car, and she could not retrieve it. So my sister and I went out there. We were quite excited, and we spent a fair amount of time trying to catch this cute little lizard. And as soon as we got him, we knew what our plan was. We were going to just keep him for the 9 months that my grandparents were still here. We were going to keep him safe, and then we were going to send him back to Florida where he belonged with my grandmother. So we took him home, and every Sunday when we came to visit my grandmother that summer, she would always want to be filled in on how the lizard was doing, and she was so invested because we were doing such an amazing job of taking care of this lizard. And, we would tell her stories about how we set up the lizard's cage, and we put, shells that we had gotten from Florida to keep it happy, and we were catching flies from the horses' field and feeding it. And then one of her favorite stories was how my sister decided that she loved the lizard, and she went to kiss it, and it snapped on her lip. And how funny it was that for a few minutes my sister was laughing and crying with a lizard dangling from her face, and that she had a little lizard hickey there for about a week. And we would tell her frequently this lizard, didn't seem to understand the big picture, because despite the fact that we wanted to get this lizard back to Florida, he escaped all the time. We'd feed him and he'd be out. We would come to the aquarium and he would just be gone like Houdini. We had no idea how he even got out. But we were pretty adept. Amazingly, we had cats and dogs in our house, so every time he got out, we assumed that he had met his demise, but we always managed to get him. Now, my grandmother's favorite story happened one night. We relayed this to her. Now, you have to remember when I tell you this story, imagine it from the perspective of my sister, who was 11 years old at the time. We had all gone to bed. We were woken by my sister screaming bloody murder. Now, my parents lived on the first floor with their bedroom, and they rarely came upstairs, but my sister screamed so loud this night that both my parents ran up the steps. The story my sister told was she was falling to sleep in that sort of twilight sleep. Her room is dark except for the door is ajar, and she can get a little bit of a glow from the hallway of the nightlight. And she hears a rustle, thinks it's her cat, and calls, "Pie Wacket, come up." And when she rolls over, there's no cat. Now, again, we are 11-year-old, 9-year-old little Catholic girls, and we had rosaries hanging on the side of our bed. And because it was the 70s, my sister had a special rosary, and it glowed in the dark. Why, I have no idea. So my sister turns, and in the glow of her room, in the glow of this rosary, the rosary starts wiggling back and forth. Now, you and I know exactly what's going on. My sister also knew exactly what was going on because she was 110% sure demonic possession. My grandmother, when we told her the story, perfect balance of laughing with and not at you. So amazing this lizard got out so many times, but we finally get to the end of the stretch. 9 months has happened. It's January 2nd. Pack him up, send him back to Florida where he belongs with my grandmother. She calls us and says it all went well. She's pretty sure she knows which lizard it is because he's got kind of a look to him. But about 2 weeks later, we get an envelope in the mail from my grandmother, and in it is a clipping from a newspaper. So she has been there all of 2 weeks, and she has told so many people this story that the news has gotten back to the Naples Times. And my grandmother loves us so much and is so blindly in love with us that even this lizard story was newsworthy.